Hey folks, my name's Kevin and it's time for a little bit more knife nerdery, and today we have a really freaking cool one, and honestly probably going to be a pretty long one because we have a full, small detailed review and comparison of the Olamic Busker and the Whippersnapper in both what they call the Wharncliffe blade shape and the Sheepsfoot, though they definitely stretch the definitions of those terms. We also have both the traditional Framelock version that they've always offered and this brand new prototype. Do you see the word prototype right there? Can I get that? Yeah. Bolsterlock version that they just released recently. As far as where these knives came from, I bought these two on secondary, but I learned after the fact that this one was actually custom made for a friend of mine. I just had no idea because it went through another person in between us. Learned that after the fact, and that was very, very funny. This one was sent my way by a guy named Mike, and that is incredibly generous of him. Thank you so much. There's only 10 of these in the entire world, so wow, very, very special thing for me to get to check out. Thank you so much. But okay. Back to the beginning. What is Olamic? Now, Olamic Cutlery is a high-end knife, manufacturer. It's kind of hard to say where they fit in because depending on what kind of knife you're buying from them, they'll be made different ways and by different people. But they're all definitely very high-end. Olamic started back in 2010 in California when Russian native Eugene Solomonic, I think that's how you pronounce his name, wanted to make some high-end fixed blades, specifically handmade Damascus fixed blades. And their initial focus was actually on perfecting a custom Damascus steel itself. They landed on a 4-alloy steel that they call high carbon vanadium Damascus, or HCVD, and they forged that entirely in-house and heat treated it to an HRC of 57 to 58. The knives they make with this were, and still are, because they do still make these, made out of a small shop in Russia, about 4 to 5 people. And while certainly functional and intended for use, they definitely fall into that kind of art knife category because they're almost all very heavily stylized. In 2013, Eugene decided to branch into folders, so he recruited custom knife maker and American Bladesmith Society mastersmith Mike Vagnino and built up a small 4 to 5 person shop around him in Visalia, California, where they're still headquartered today. Their early models, like the Wayfarer, now called the Wayfarer Classic, the Rainmaker, and the Gambit, were all completely handmade customs, no CNC whatsoever. In 2016, though, in an effort to both expand production and improve precision and reliability around the moving parts, they pivoted to what some might call like a mid-tech model, where the primary components are manufactured for them, and as I understand it, in Italy, and if you look at these blade grinds, yeah, I believe that, with the finishing and assembly work all done in their California shop. And while that might not sound like much for some companies, if you know Olamic, you know that finishing work is a hell of a lot of work. Olamic is all about the finishing work. They take it to the most extreme degrees you can imagine and truly live by the motto, never the same. It's on all of their cases for a very good reason. There are over 20 million different combinations of modifications and finishes that you can choose when you customize your knife. And the techniques for many of those, they invented entirely themselves in-house. And they both set the bar and constantly push the limits on what can be done to titanium. There are a lot of extremely talented anodizers, sculptors, finishers, and whatnot out there in the knife modding world, but the folks at Olamic are truly unmatched. I very sincerely believe that. To keep things nice and Russian, essentially all of their knives have been designed, or at least co-designed, by someone who is either Russian or very Russian adjacent. The initial Wayfarer was designed by Eugene and Mike together, and the Rainmaker and Swish were both designed by Alexander Birakov. The Gambit was designed by renowned knife maker Serge Panchenko, who is not Russian but Ukrainian, and that is literally Russian adjacent. They share a border. I have absolutely no idea who designed the Soloist. I googled for hours and could not find it, so who knows? Maybe that guy's from Zanzibar, or maybe it's a lady. I have no idea. The two knives you see on the table, or I guess three, both of these knife types you see on the table, are both designed by another Russian, a guy named Andrei Kolesnikov, who originally joined Olamic in 2016 to do absolutely bonkers, insane metal carving on their scales. Seriously, the man is absurdly talented. He's multi-talented though, and so he also designed the entire Busker, and after his success, the Whippersnapper. Eventually in 2021, Olamic said that they were going to temporarily stop production on the Whippersnapper. In part, this had to do with them focusing on other models, in part them introducing a new model, a small non-locking knife they called the Appetizer, and in part they just wanted to revamp the Whippersnapper in some way. And at Blade Show West of 2021, we finally got to see the outcome of that, this Bolsterlock version like we have here in this prototype. Now, the large majority of Olamic knives are one-offs. They're customized by customers to exactly their heart's desire. They have a tool on their website for doing this for some version, and other versions you have to talk with them and through a conversation, and they've got a huge gallery of things you can pick from. Some of their knives, though, are pre-made and sold either through Olamic themselves or through knife retailers. The ones they sell themselves tend to be wild and creative still, and the ones they sell through retailers tend to be a little bit more plain Jane. And we have examples of all three of these types here today. This Busker, while still reasonably plain Jane, is a true custom, though not customized by me. Like I said, it was by my friend. While this Bolster is a fancy custom sold directly by them. Both of those come in a case that looks like this that says Olamic Custom. This third one was picked up through a retailer. Not originally by me, but apparently it was from Lamnia. This last variety tends to get a different case that says Olamic Tactical. Whoops. Nope, over here, Olamic Tactical, there we are. And I don't know if that's 100% the case, but most of the ones I've seen that have come from that kind of market have Olamic Tactical, and they all seem to have this sticker over here with the number on it, and I have absolutely no idea what that stands for. It's not correlated to the date of production. This one was made in March, and that's a 7. I don't know. If anyone down below has any idea what this stands for, I would love to know, so please leave me a comment. So let's start taking a look at these actual knives and talk about how they perform and how they're different from each other, because these are some really freaking cool things. Okay, let's talk about these blades. This is one of the things that makes Olamic knives look particularly odd. I mean, especially on the Busker, the handles look weird too, but the blades really make them stand out. These ones are kind of normal, but they get really weird on the Busker. They come in 4 different shapes. This particular one is called the Semper, and it's my favorite of all of them. But they also come in something called the Largo, which is basically this exact same shape, but with this part still filled in. And the Gusto, which is basically this exact same shape, but with 2 different grind heights here and here. The reason you would want something like that on a knife is if you want a slicier portion of the blade and a more robust portion of the blade for doing power cuts and slicing cuts. But we're going to talk about why I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense later when we get to this blade grind in general. Then there's also, lastly, the Vampo. Semper means always in Latin. Largo means large or to be large in Latin, and maybe because it has the largest amount of steel still in it. Gusto is taste in Latin, and I have no idea why it would be called that, but Vampo is not really Latin at all. Technically, it's Portuguese for vampire, but I think it's just a vampire joke in general because it's the exact same thing as this, but with a very cute little hawkbill fang at the very tip. Now up here on the Whippersnapper, they call this a Wharncliffe. And I mean, oh, okay, sure. It's a relatively completely flat across the bottom. That's Wharncliffe. And it is, for the most part, sloping from the top all the way to the bottom, kind of continuously. A traditional Wharncliffe wouldn't have any kind of knuckle like it does right here. But, you know, of the two, this is more Wharncliffe. They call this a Sheepsfoot. And most Sheepsfoot still will have a perfectly flat edge, but it's not that uncommon for a Sheepsfoot to have a rounded edge, and this one does in fact have a little bit more belly to it as that one than that one does, which makes this one a little bit better at kind of that like rolling slicing, because you can just make more contact with more spots of the blade. This also does have some other pretty sheepsfooty characteristics, because a sheepsfoot typically will have a perfectly parallel along the top flat back spine with a single inflection point that comes down to the edge. Just a traditional sheepsfoot will have a much steeper drop off than this, and so this still has a more Wharncliffe level of piercing tip, especially because they added this swedge on, which makes this pretty thin down here at the tip. It's a pretty precise tip. Now, I said in the intro that this is obviously made in Italy because of the grinds, and that is my number one complaint about these knives. These are all small knives, and they're all EDC knives, and yeah, not every knife should have a super thin slicey blade. Some knives you definitely want a thick, powerful, robust blade that you can do some really, really heavy work with. But small EDC knives, I don't know. I personally think small, and this is pretty darn small, I think small EDC knives should have a thin slice blade. I said that this is one of the reasons why I think they're made in Italy, because the Italian knife makers have a reputation for this. If you don't know, most Italian production knife companies are made out of the same collection of factories that are all in Magnago, Italy, and co-owned by a consortium of knife companies that collectively go by the name MKM, or Magnago Knife Makers. There's a bunch of ones in there: Lion Steel, Fox, Viper, there's like 7 total. If you look at what most of their knives look like, this is the Blade HQ Vox Dapper. I think this is made by Fox Knives. It says right there, Italy. It has the exact same kind of thing going on, where it's relatively thick behind the edge and a relatively thick blade stock and a relatively non-aggressive grind. And so this thing is just not a fantastic slicer. And neither are these. They're all okay, but they're just not great. But the thing is it doesn't have to be like that. So this is the Giant Mouse Ace Biblio, and this is also made in those same MKM factories. And yet this is a nice aggressive grind that comes to a very thin behind the edge. This is a great slicer. So they could have better grinds even coming from the same factory. Now, how that's compounded is that these are relatively thick blade stocks. These are not thick by any real means. They're just under 1.4, 1.37, 1.3 to 1.39. But if you're going to have that kind of blade stock, you can't have quite this short of a grind. This is a 0.7 inch grind, and this is a 0.75, 0.7, and this one has a full 1 inch grind, and it's definitely the best of all of them. It also just, a taller grind gives you more opportunity to thin that out behind the edge. These two both get to about 0.21 behind the edge, or 0.021, 21 thousandths behind the edge, and that's fine. That's not bad at all. This one's more like 23, 24 thousandths behind the edge. And it also has the shortest grind of all of them. And so, yeah, one of the reasons I was really excited to check this out is to see whether or not it actually cut better than this, because this one has a tendency to kind of wedge in thicker stuff, and it really does. This really does, especially if you're cutting out here towards the tip where this bevel here, what do you call these? This swedge is thinning out the blade, but even just in general, this really does push through dense materials like double-walled cardboard noticeably better. None of these are great slicers, but this one is definitely the best. As far as blade shapes go, we're going to talk more about overall ergonomics when we get into talking about the handle, but for now let's talk about how these odd shapes are actually very, very functional. And that's one of the things that's going to be a theme across all of this. The weirdness of these are functional. It's almost Spyderco-esque in that. I don't mean that they look like Spydercos, but they're Spyderco-esque in the sense that they're definitely picking ergonomic shapes in spite of what they look like, not because of what they look like. That I could be wrong. Maybe Andre designed these because he thinks they look beautiful, but they definitely look weird by most people's standards, but that weird is functional. So this big swoop up here works as a thumb ramp, and it just works very, very nicely as that. This is a reasonably small knife, and I have medium-sized glove hands, slightly on the smaller side, and I can get a really comfortable full forefinger grip, and it's just so nice to be able to put my thumb right there. I feel so incredibly locked in. I have a lot of control and a lot of power behind it. Now, if you have much bigger hands than me, you might have other issues running off the back of this, but you also might have issues being kind of cramped up behind this, because this is definitely the kind of thing that you want to be behind this thumb ramp. Being on top of it would really suck, so you would definitely have to pull your thumb back. You could, in theory, go past it, but that'd be a very strange way to hold this knife. You'd have to cant this so far back in order for that to be comfortable that it's even past like a hammery grippy type of way, and it would just be kind of a weird way to hold this. Where this really shines, though, is in a pinch grip. We'll talk about more in a later when we get to the handles, but as far as the blade goes, you can run your finger down this back part and you're getting right up against the tip, and it just feels so secure, so comfortable. This is fantastic in a pinch grip. Moving up here, the Wharncliffe version of the Whippersnapper has a similar thing going on, but the proportions are all different. This indeed has a thumb ramp again, but it's much further back. I find that what that means is in this particular one, I tend to have the knife canted reasonably far forward for it to fit in my thumb back there. And this feels great. It really, really does. But this puts the knife tilted further down than I typically want. That's really good if you're trying to cut with that tip but pulling back, but I normally don't cut with the tip in this kind of grip. So I instead end up canting this whole thing backward in my hand and putting my thumb above it. And unlike this, since this is so much further back, putting your thumb above this is actually pretty darn comfortable, pretty darn reasonable, and one of the more common ways that I use this knife. This, again, though, really, really shines in a pinch grip. You put your finger along this long slope and you are pretty close to the tip. It's very comfortable, and it is just such a good way of doing those controlled utility cuts. Love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Up here, we have something totally different. We have no thumb ramp whatsoever, so you don't get the benefit of that thumb ramp. It doesn't, you don't get to push anywhere. But I find that that actually is better for me because you have total flexibility of how this is tilted in your hand and where your thumb hits accordingly, and they all just feel really good. Andre did such a good job of making the rest of the knife really lock you in. We'll talk about that with the handle, that I don't really feel like I need the thumb ramp. And so to me, this one is the most versatile. Now, it also works fantastically in a pinch grip, but you'll have to be choked a little bit further back. And that's because once you get past this corner, you're now on this wedge. And either being directly on the corner or up past it with your finger down on this wedge, you can do that, and you'll need to if you want to get close to the tip for really, really precise control, but it's just not the most comfortable thing in the world ever, putting your finger on a relatively thin wedge. It is a flat. Some knives have a true corner where both edges of this wedge come to a point, and this isn't like that. But it's still a very relatively thin surface for you to put that on as opposed to being back here. So of these three blades, from cutting perspective and just general grips, this one is my favorite. I find it to be the most versatile and is noticeably the best cutter. But honestly, they're all pretty darn great at the kind of cutting I do the most, which is pinch grip utility cuts. They're all really, really good box cutters because when you're doing something like box cutting, you're never cutting with the entire surface. So the fact that these are a little bit wedgy of knives means that that doesn't really come into play with the type of cutting I do the most. Now, as far as sharpening choils and that kind of stuff goes on, there's also a really big difference. The sharpening choil concept is kind of a moot point on these because where that plunge grind, the thing that takes it from the full thickness down to the thinness behind the edge, where that lands is all the way up here in the center of this finger choil. And so it's completely irrelevant. You have all of this distance for sharpening. And that's one of the things that makes me like this better about it. The Busker doesn't have a traditional finger choil, but it has this really big kind of choke up spot. I don't really know what you call spots like this. It makes it super duper comfortable in this kind of grip, but it does mean that you don't have a whole lot of space to sharpen. And that's in part because this is one of the few things they didn't do super great. The sharpening choil here, the plunge grind here is very kind of lax. It takes this entire distance, the entire path to go from this full thickness down. And that means that the moment you sharpen this has never been sharpened, this has only been stropped. The moment you start sharpening this, you're going to go further and further up this edge, and you're going to get that smile. And it's going to become harder and harder to get a good, clean, consistent edge. And so from that regard, these both equally outshine that one. These all have a really beautiful grind line satin finish, but they do come in a bunch of other varieties. And I personally would probably, if I were to customize one of these, get some kind of stone washed or tumbled finish. One of the things that we're going to talk about finishing in general later, but one of the things that really, really shines about the finishing on these knives is that there are no sharp corners anywhere on this blade. There was pointy corners in certain places, but they're not jabby, and nothing is sharp. They've all been so beautifully rounded off that this just feels so nice. It's almost as comfortable as a truly crowned spine, even though none of this is crowned. It's just so good. And where that really comes into play is inside these finger holes. All of these are knives that are meant to be able to be finger flicked. They have a bunch of deployment methods, but they're meant to be finger flicked. And I have found that almost across the board, knives with a satin finish tend to scrape my fingernail up because they tend to leave a really, really crisp edge in here. And these all have a beautiful chamfer along this, but not just that. It's not just a chamfer. Even like, because if you have a 90-degree angle, sure, that's a sharp corner. But if you then add a chamfer, you have a 45-degree angle, but now you just have corners there and there. And they've gone through and made this thing just so wonderfully smooth. And as a result, this is so nice to slide around, and it's so nice to slide your finger past. And when you flick this out, yeah, they just really went above and beyond on the finishing of the blades themselves. So now let's move back and talk about the handles. The handles, again, are where you get some weird shapes. And across the board, again, I like the Whippersnapper better than the Busker. The big reason for that is partly size, but mostly the shape. This really dramatic swoop down at the back has one super, super big benefit, and that's fitting into your palm in a pinch grip. And when you do it like this, yeah, this feels fantastic. This does. It nestles into this spot right here in the way that is just so incredibly comfortable. And so if you plan on only ever using the knife in this way, and honestly, that's the only way I ever use this knife, it feels great. This swoop back here and this little hook gives you a wonderful place to push and anchor your finger against to kind of pull this back into your palm. And the rest of my fingers rest down here. And this, seriously, one of the most comfortable pinch grips of any knife. The downside to this swoop back here comes to do with opening. I'll talk about this probably more when I talk about action, but I might not. I think I probably will. But the reality is, this knife is small enough, and since there's no handle back here, it's kind of hard to anchor this knife against your hand when you're doing a kind of flick motion. That's also compounded by the location of this, which we will talk about in action. But just in general, I find it a little bit tricky to get a good grip on this and make it not slide around in my hand. That's where these things really, really shine. It doesn't curve down as much, so you definitely don't get that same effect, but there is this slope right here, and it fits not as nicely. You can see there's a little gap right here in my hand, but it feels really, really good. But that problem I was just describing is completely gone. Instead, the anchor is back at the back here, and this is so easy to hold in my hand in a way that is very secure, and I never ever feel like I am going to have that slide out of my hand. Whereas this one has actually literally slid out of my hand. It is like the back part is slid forward like that. It's worth noting that the Whippersnapper prototype in the Bolsterlock has a lack of chamfering right here. One of the things that this has is these two kind of dramatic swoops right there on either side. And that has been completely removed on this knife. But it's not like this is uncomfortable. There is a mild chamfer right here, and there's mostly just really, really nice rounded edges. Continuing the thing I said about the blade, these handles are just smooth everywhere. They do such an incredible, outstanding job of making every single spot feel really, really nice. So across the board, I think these handles are the kind of thing that are really, really good. The Whippersnapper is bigger enough that I can choke all the way back and still get a 4-finger grip. My 4th finger is kind of rolling off this side, but I still have a lot on there, and I could choke up even further and fit it all up into this spot. But again, slightly smaller hands allow me to do that. You probably won't be able to do that if you wear size large gloves. But this choil is so dang good that I don't really know why you would want to. It just gives you so many more options. Anyway, I love the handle here. I think it is so incredibly fantastic. So while we're talking about the handles and the grips you would hold them in, let's talk about what's going on down here and how it's different between the two. On the Busker, this part here on the tang is actually sitting recessed from the handles. It goes further in right there. And if you're choked up all the way, this feels really, really nice because you're pressing against this reasonably thick and very smooth piece of material right there. It's just great. But if you pull back a little bit, this suddenly becomes markedly less comfortable. And it's because you're pushing with that recessed bit against this corner. Now it's not sharp. They've gone out of their way to add little tiny chamfers to absolutely everything. But even though it's not sharp, it is just jabby. And so this is one of the few spots on the knife that's actually really quite rough. Now that is a moot point over here. Sure, you're never really going to be holding the knife like this. This just doesn't make any sense. You're going to be back here or you can be up here. But if you did, it feels totally good. And the reason is because this is flush. This is not recessed like it is on the other one, and so you can't ever really put pressure on that corner. You can feel it if you choose to drag your finger here, but it's not really possible. This does come at a slight cost though. The fact that this is sitting flush means it sticks further out, and that means that when you have it on the closed position, it sticks further out too. It's basically flush. It's just recessed enough that you can't see it at all, but you can feel it. And this is a reasonably sharp edge, and so you can just kind of feel that right there. It scrapes you. Now over here, because that is shorter and is recessed in, it's the exact same kind of recessed on this side. It just sits slightly below. And so you just don't contact it at all if you run over like that. Now, for the most part, you're not going to be running your finger here when it's in this closed position. It's like at the bottom low down, but it's just one of those things where like, again, small details. As far as the back of the handle, the lanyard hole is one of the odd things that they did over here. It's fun because the lanyard hole mirrors the shape. And they've done that kind of across the board on all of their knives. Some of their knives have like an oval slot here, and they'll have an oval slot back here. This one has, or like what do you call that? Like a pill-shaped slot. This one has an oval, and you can see oval, oval. And here you see triangle, triangle. Now, if you get the sheepsfoot blade, this shape has been elongated. We're going to talk about why that's better when we get to action, but what was really surprising to me is to see that they dropped that on this prototype Bolsterlock version. They have just this kind of, I don't know, afterthought circle that just goes all the way through, and I'm honestly really surprised they did that, in part because it's just, I don't know. I mean, it does mirror other circles on the handles. It's not like there's no circles, but I always really, really loved that they did this. Like, I don't like lanyard holes on knives. I want them to be invisible, if anything. But if they're going to be visible, the fact that it like mirrors this is a really, really nice aesthetic tie-in. So to have it just be a circle kind of is disappointing. The other thing is that this allows you to get really pretty close to the back. The lanyard that you would be able to pull off this way without being particularly loose. Same thing back here, you're really close to the back. This is kind of far in, and I don't really know why they did that. Like they obviously, because the actual overall shape of the backspacer is something that is the same, so they obviously could pull this as far back as that, but it means that you're going to have the loop of your lanyard kind of big, and so if it falls off this way, it's going to be pretty loose and be kind of floppy. And I don't know, across the board, I don't really understand why they did that. While we're talking about the handles of these knives, it's important to note that there is absolutely no internal skeletonization happening. Now, they do offer a much more literal form of skeletonization where they'll make hole punch throughs all the way through. It's not just the regular speed holes that you'll see. You'll do crazy patterning, speckling of holes everywhere that they call acid rain. And they'll also do fun zigzag random cutouts, whatever you want. The sky's the limit. But they can't do internal milling skeletonization for weight relief because they want to have the option of doing a whole bunch of variety of three-dimensional carving and contouring on the outside. And if they had those pockets on the inside, they would risk punching through them on accident. The result of this, though, is that these knives are a little bit heavier than you'd expect, and they're a little bit back heavy. This one right here is just under 2.5 inch blade, and yet it weighs just under 3 ounces. That's not a heavy knife, but it's just a little bit of a nugget for its size. Similarly, this one's 2.8 inch blade, and the overall thing weighs 3.374. So again, kind of heavy for its size, but still by no means a heavy knife. This guy up here is a little bit lighter. It's, even though it has a slightly shorter blade, but it's a taller blade. This is a 2.75 inch blade. But the entire thing weighs only 3.25. And the reason for that is because of the Bolsterlock. A significant portion of the titanium back here has been replaced with carbon fiber, and that weighs a lot less. The weight impact you'll get is going to depend on what your inlay material is, and carbon fiber is one of the lightest you can get, but the positioning of that weight relief is going to impact the balance no matter what. All of that weight relief is happening on the back end of the knife, and this particular one also has a little bit more meat up here towards the tip, and so the balance on this one is meaningfully better. On this guy, our balance point is all the way back here. And so for reference, that's just past the end of the steel lock bar insert. On this one, it's meaningfully further up, right there. We're just past that first screw. That's a full 1/4 of an inch, maybe even 1/3 of an inch closer. And for reference, where you want your balance point is to be right around where your pointer finger is. That's how you feel the most in control and the most like nimble and balanced. And that is basically right where it is if you're in the choked back position. If you're choked up, it's a little bit further, but this is kind of perfectly balanced. This guy, by comparison, is a little bit tail heavy, but still, none of these are heavy knives, and you still feel like you have a lot of control. The balance point on this one, I think, is right about there. And so again, that's not in a bad spot, but because this is such a small knife, I very rarely am holding it back here in this 3-finger grip. It's much more likely that I'm choked up. And as a result, this one does feel just a hair tail heavy. Talking about other parts of this handle, let's talk about backspacers. One of the things that they have is these really cool floating backspacers. They're attached at these points right there, and otherwise they just kind of hover. And if I put something, do I have anything light? There we go. You can see right through them, and it's just a really cool effect. You can pick how you want your backspacer to be anodized or not anodized. This one is anodized, but it's anodized just to match, to not stand out. But one of the things that's really cool is they'll do really customized file work on the back. This one has what they call their nugget file work. And since it's been anodized gold, that gold nugget thing means that this is just such a cohesive theme. It works so nicely with this gold snakeskin, or maybe this is, no, I think this is the camo carbon? I forget. This is fat carbon, and I think this is gold camo carbon. But it's the way that it has been slightly contoured, and that's in and of itself something that's kind of new. These are just flat, and this has a contour to it. And the way that it's been contoured means that you get this really beautiful swirly effect rather than just the traditional blurbs that you would have in the regular camo carbon. But that gold here and that gold here and the anodized kind of gold there, which by the way comes true in real life, comes out as a pretty true gold in real life. A lot of times gold will come out looking kind of more bronzy, and they manage to hit a really nice gold, but it just comes together so cohesively. And this brings us to the thing that excites me the most about this being a bolster lock. We'll talk about how that impacts action later, but wow, the thing I'm so freaking excited about is that they're going to get to play with other materials for the first time. For the vast majority, most part, they've only been able to play with other materials a little bit with inlays that they've done right here, and they haven't really pushed that super duper hard. They'll have a stripe inlay like right there, and they do use some wild materials for that. Really wild stuff. But it's such a small amount that you don't really get to see them shine. And this is a good example of them shining because the finishing on this is perfect. This is so polished smooth. The transition here is so good. They did just such a nice job, and tying that in with the gold theme, like I said, just absolutely perfect. This one here is an example of one of their kind of in-house finishes. This is something that's called a text wash in color earth. So text wash is basically like a cross between a like a bead blast and a stone wash and an orange peel. If you merge those together, actually it's more like stone washing and orange peel, but if you merge those together, and that literally might be what they're doing. A lot of what their weird finishes are is them just experimenting and combining different techniques that no one's ever really thought to do in the same order, or in a different particular order than normal. And so that's probably how they're accomplishing this, is literally just giving it an orange peel and then stone washing the whole thing. This one down here is what they call their dark wash, and by contrast, this is their light wash, according to the COA card. And so I personally love the way this feels. It's nice and smooth, but it has a little bit of nice texture to it. I don't like the way this feels. If you're a Sebenza person, you'll probably love this, but this has that kind of dry, chalky texture to it that is just, it's not my thing. It tends to make my skin crawl just a little bit. And so if I were to make a completely custom version of this, I would go for this light wash or some other completely different finish. I actually love this. It has such a nice feel. Another finishing detail I wanted to show is that they've mirror polished this underside. Yep, there's my face. Hello. Yeah, this part that you put your finger against in the finger choil and all of them, they mirror polish that. But check this out. One of the things that I think is really, really cool, this laser engraving mark is colorful. I honestly don't know how they're doing that. I know that you can laser engrave color onto tie, but I didn't know that you could do that on steel. But it's this kind of like green, orange, reddy kind of thing going on all of them. This one's green, says Busker underneath. This one is much more of that kind of orange color at the top. It's like a gradient fade. And this one says WhipSnap. And this one is right there, prototype. Man, this is so cool. This is a prototype. Anyway, what a neat feature. Okay, let's talk about action. And this is one of the things that gets really, really interesting because these knives are designed to open a bunch of different ways. They have a video that they posted on their Instagram that they have on their website about you can open this 10 different ways. They get really kind of wild. But for the most part, these all are designed to be either middle finger or thumb flicked and to have a front flipper. And when it comes to opening action, they do really excel, especially at that front flipper, especially up here. So from a reverse flicking first though, let's talk about that. I think this is one of those things where the way that you hold it when you flick is going to impact how well this works for you. And across the board, I think the Whippersnapper's design works better. And what it comes down to is the size and placement of this hole. When you middle finger flick a knife, the most typical way to do it is to kind of hold it laying flat on your hand and then curl your finger back. And the problem is that this hole is further down and further out than it is on most knives and on the Whippersnapper. And so what that happens for me is that like my finger just doesn't hit there. In order to make it hit, I either have to hold the entire thing a little bit further up, which means I then have some trouble anchoring the back, again, partly because this just doesn't exist back here. And so I either have to pull it like that, or I have to kind of cant the entire thing this way. And that means that I'm definitely flicking really just kind of out. And you can do it. It works perfectly fine, but it's just not the easiest. The other way that you typically will hold one of these when you're flicking, or hold any knife when you're flicking, is with the entire thing kind of twisted up in your hand more like that, and in this kind of pinch grip. And here what you're doing, instead of putting the middle of your finger into the hole, you're instead putting the side of the finger in. And instead of flicking out, you're flicking up. And that's where this works a lot better, because this being further down means that your finger, because you're coming down instead of in, your finger naturally hits a little bit further down like that. And so it's pretty easy to get your finger in there and do that kind of flick. And so I think if you're the type of person that tends to flick with the side of your finger anyway, this one is going to be just a better option for you than if you're this type of flicker. But both do work. Up here on the Whippersnappers though, it's a different ballpark because the location and size of it, it's a bigger hole and it's further up, means that this is a dream. There's just no it's exactly where you want your finger to be. And so this kind of flick works perfectly fine, and that like side of your finger flick works perfectly fine. But because this is slightly smaller and slightly further in, this one works the best of all of them. If I overlap these two, you can see, what's the best way for me to do that? This way. You can see that this one is just significantly longer and it sticks out a little bit further. And what that means is that it's easier for you to get your finger in. It's just more space, and you have just more space in the top to bottom to be able to hit up here or hit down there. So I find that this one is just super duper easy to middle finger flick. And if you are doing that second kind of grip where you're using the side of your finger, again, your finger typically comes a little bit further down on the knife when you do it that way. And so that extra distance just makes it more comfortable. Of the three of these, this one is definitely the easiest to flick, and across knives in general, this is a tremendously easy and tremendously fun to flick knife. It's an exceptional flicker. Now, they've dialed the detent on all of these to primarily be for that kind of flicking action. You can thumb flick all of these. All of them work perfectly fine for thumb flickers. I'm not great at thumb flicking whole knives, but they're totally serviceable. But they middle finger flick so well, especially with the detent dialed the way it is, that I always use that method. But these are all top flippers. And actually I will use on these, I'll use that front flipper fairly often. The thing about front flipping is that typically you want a slightly weaker detent if you're going to use it as a front flipper. And so these knives have a pretty hard detent for for a front flipping action. And especially with how small this is, and with the way that this pocket clip curls so far in like this, they both curl, but this one comes really over to the edge of the knife. It's kind of hard to get a great grip on this. And yeah, it's not like I feel like it's going to fly out of my hand. It's just, you definitely are pushing harder on this than you normally would. Part of the reason here is the design of this front flipper just doesn't work anywhere near as well as this one. It works good, but it's not my favorite. Part of what's going on here is that there's no jimping along the top, and the entire thing is shorter down. So without that jimping up there, you're kind of forced to push a little bit further back. But the problem with that is that you're both right, you have a very short lever arm distance because you're not very far above the pivot. And you're also being forced to kind of push upward in a direction that's not, it kind of makes you run into the handle. So if you look, since you're further back and you're pushing up this way, your thumb tends to rub against this and makes it harder to get a good forceful flick. Your thumb would naturally want to flip outward to compensate for that, but you can't really do that because then you're flicking in a direction where you're losing traction part of the way through. So because you're further down like this, below the front of this handle, you end up having to do this kind of like wrap around effect that's kind of harder to do forcefully. Like if you're doing it slow, it would look something like that. And so what people do, I think what most people would do instead, is just kind of hope that you get enough force with a flick and come off that way, and just hope that there's enough force to carry through. And because this is a strong enough detent, it generally speaking works. It's never going to be the absolute best. But that's where these come in, because holy crap, these are fantastic. Between these two, this one has a slightly weaker detent because of the fact that it's a Bolsterlock. We'll talk about that in just a second. But the design of this, yeah, it's not going to look as attractive to some people, but these knives are so weird looking that if you're the type of person who's going to buy a knife that looks like this, you're probably cool with the fact that this has a kind of mohawk thing sticking out the front. But I've definitely heard people say that this is a turnoff for the knife for them, but the design shape is just so much more functional. Part of that is just that it is much, much taller. So you have a lot more leverage, but part of it is also that it wraps around. And so it's encouraging you to put your finger up here and push kind of in a downward backward direction, which means that you don't have to do any kind of like change of motion as you go. You just have to put it right here and pull back. And it is effortless. Absolutely effortless. This is one of the single easiest to front flippers, period. At this point, I've handled quite a few front flippers, and this one is just a dream. You have such good leverage that you can even do that kind of roll your finger around the top thing. Like, this is normally something that I don't either can't do or don't like doing on knives, because this is not a part of your finger that has a lot of meat behind it. It's not something that your evolutionarily was designed for pushing on things, right? So you both don't have fingerprints that give you traction, and you don't have meat behind it right up here. And so this is not something that's going to work well on knives that require traction alone. But because you have so much leverage, and because this jimping is good, we'll have to talk about that in just a moment, this one actually does work. I still will never do it, but it's kind of fun that you can. Speaking of that jimping, the jimping here is just better than down here. This is one of the very few things about this knife that is sharp. Everything is so incredibly smoothed out in this really, really careful, wonderful way that it's surprising me that this jimping is as sharp as it is. It's just kind of crisp edges. You'll see that there is a slight, very slender chamfer right here that runs down, and it does run the length of these. So there is rounded off, or chamfered off right on these edges, but this is still very, like, if you push your finger into this, it really jabs in. This is one of my least favorite kinds of jimping, in the sense that it's really deep, really far spread out, and really crisp. And those don't feel good to press against. And if you use this a lot, it ends up hurting. And if you actually slide off this for some reason, it really hurts. By contrast, the jimping up here, let's hold them both up at the same time. Yeah, the jimping up here is just so much better. Partly it's because it has a significantly larger chamfer, which means that from side to side, this is just really nice and smooth. Partly it's that the jimping is spread out. Like, if it's going to be as deep as it is, the fact that it's wrapping around this radius here means that it's spread out. And so your finger can kind of go in there in a way that doesn't feel like it's sinking into these holes. It just kind of sits in those holes. And then this is still nice and crisp here, but it's nowhere near as crisp. It's not as sharp. And so this is the kind of thing that doesn't feel good to press your finger into and kind of wiggle it about. And this feels perfectly fine. You have really good locked in traction, but it does not hurt to press on this. And so the jimping and design and everything about this makes this just so much better. It's just better. It's also going to be better for this reach around thing. And that's partly also because of the shape of this knife and the design of this flipper tab. This reach around kind of way of opening it. Hey, look, I didn't hit myself. That's really rare. What happens almost every single time, because there's no jimping up here, I can't pull like this. I have to cant this entire thing forward and pull like with my finger farther along. And that means that when you look at where this blade's going to end up, when this is finally open, yeah, it's right where my finger was. And especially because there's this hump on this one, this tends to smack me in the knuckle almost every time. Yep, it just whacked me right in the knuckle. Now over here, we don't have that problem. Now part of that is because there's no finger ramp here, but over here it's the exact same thing. These just don't require you to reach forward as much. You can put your finger right here. Instead of down like this, you can just do this, and you have really great grip right here. So this is super easy to do. And so this is actually a pretty fun way of opening the knife. For a knife with multiple deployment methods, this is one of the best. Now, when it comes to closing the knife, this is another thing that this knife does. These knives do kind of differently than other folks. A lot of knives these days are trying to really target that super drop shut, free fall action that a lot of people are chasing. And these just fundamentally don't try to do that whatsoever. They've got a very stiff lock bar, and that is the number one thing involved in making a knife free fall, is to have very, very light lock bar pressure, because it's the pressure of the detent ball against the blade that is the number one cause of friction there. And so because this is a very stiff lock bar, these are very much not free fall knives. They are the kind of thing that are going to go exactly where you leave them, and you have to kind of shake them home. But because there is, again, the finishing work on these things, because they have polished the detent track, there's such low friction when it comes to actual kind of the grittiness friction, that these things are super, super easy to close. Even though they are not going to be something that falls on their own, the amount that also the blade shapes have to do with this too. There's enough meat out here towards the tip that like these things just swing home really, really easily. But okay, let's talk about that glassiness. I just said that was polished, and oh my God, these things are exceptionally glassy, exceptionally glassy. I now own a Trevor Burger, and Trevor Burger knives are effectively the smoothest thing in the universe. Those are true butter on glass. It's insane. But these are pretty darn close. These are exceptionally smooth knives. And that's really impressive given how firm this lock bar pressure is, because there's a lot of force pushing on that. Partly that's because of the detent ball. They are using a ceramic detent ball that is quite wide, so it has a flatter-ish surface. Partly that's them polishing it, but it's just so good. What you'll also notice is this. Yeah, that's a detent ramp action right there. And since this is the kind of knife that feels really, really good to push home with your finger, it's the perfect candidate for a detent ramp. Now, I have recently put up a video all about what exactly a detent ramp is, and I featured this knife in that video. So I'll refer you to that for an explanation of what they are. But what's cool about this detent ramp is that they do it in a way that's different. I think the diagram here I have it. The diagram I used in that video shows these different ways that detent ramps tend to be drawn. And this is what is like the normal version that I described as an ideal detent ramp, where it's sufficiently deep in this way and sufficiently long in that way that there's no bump to get on and a very minor bump to get off. But there's always still a minor bump to get off. And they do it this way that like very few people do, because it really takes so much more time. It's hard. They have a sufficiently deep entry point, but they've gone in and rounded this off. It's not a straight line like most detent balls are. It's a curved ramp, and they've gone in and polished all of that. And so there is no bump onto the ramp, and there is no perceptible top to the ramp whatsoever. You can tell when you're no longer having to push force. Like I can tell I'm off the ramp now, and because I'm no longer, I can feel that this isn't flexing anymore, but there is no bump at all. And that's the kind of thing that you'll only find on knives with really, really high-end finishing work. And so it's just super impressive, and it makes this slide home. Oh, it is just so freaking good. Now, the last thing I want to talk about with this kind of the way that this detent works, I said that this is a very, very strong lock bar, but I said earlier that it's a strong, but it's like kind of a medium detent. The detent is firm, but it's not like on the very firm end. It's like maybe on the firm end of medium. And that's might be surprising given how strong this lock bar is, because it's really quite hard. And the thing is, they are doing that by having relatively unintentionally kind of shallow engagement. Let's see if I can show this. Maybe I need to zoom in. Right there. Okay, yeah, there's the ball. But if you look at this like under a magnifying glass or something like that, what you'll find is that the detent ball is just not sitting very deep. And the way that detent balls work is that the further down you get, the more, the less of your force that's pushing against the flipper tab or something like that is working in the action of pushing the detent ball out of the way. And so at the beginning, you have a very small component of your force that's actually pushing the ball down, because most of it's pushing against this wall. It's like pushing up a very steep thing. And so they have a very firm detent ball, but by making it engage only up here, it's a pretty like shallow ramp that they're doing. And so the result is that they're kind of canceling out a lot of that lock bar strength by making it shallower. And so it's kind of a strange choice to do. A lot of people don't do that because they would rather have that low lock bar pressure to make it so that it's more free flowing. But so I don't really know why they're going this route, but the effect, because you do have that firm pressure, is that you have a really, I don't know, you're just really aware of the fact that there is no grit. And if there were grit in here, you would know it immediately. One of the interesting things that these folks do that other folks don't is that this sits perfectly flat. Maybe I need this. This sits perfectly flat when it's in the locked the suppressed position. That's actually kind of rare. Most Framelock knives will sit slightly further in, and they'll become flush on the outside when the knife is partially open. But if you look at this, this is actually sitting proud. My finger will hit right here when we're in the slightly open position. When we're opening up like this, it's pushing the lock bar, overextending it past. They do that on all of these, and I don't really know why. It's kind of a moot point. Here, let's get a backdrop there. You can really see it on that one. Get it to focus. Well, whatever. It's sticking out right there. But where that really comes into play is over here on this bolster, because on these guys, the regular Framelock versions, it is possible, despite this over travel stop, or whatever, to push this over to the point where this is now unencumbered by that pressure and have it fall down to your finger. These can absolutely be fall to your nail knives. This one can't. So these guys have this one has an external lock bar relief. This one has an internal lock bar relief, and it's interesting that they did that on one and not the other. I don't know why. I like internal better. But this one, being a bolster lock, means that there's one continuous piece of metal that goes this entire way like you would have on a Framelock, but there's this overlay of a scale that suppresses that in. And so one of the side effects of this is that this actually has markedly lighter lock bar pressure than the others, but it still feels like it has very firm lock bar pressure when you're opening and closing it like this. And the reason is because this overlay here makes it so that you can't actually push this out all the way like you would normally be able to. This thinner liner lock-esque version here means it's easy to push over, but look what's happening. There is still this lock bar insert here, but the scale itself is also blocking you from moving it over. And so when you go up, like right now, this is flush. But I said that when these are up partway closed, that it's actually sticking out proud. And it does. Now it's sticking out proud, and it's actually slightly bending this scale. And so the result is, because you would have to bend this scale to move it all the way over, it's not possible to make this free fall. This one cannot fall to your nail, because without significantly bending this, you can't push it over far enough to get it like that. You have to get it up onto that ramp, and then it's like using the full weight of this to kind of torque it over and slightly bend it over. So the action on these from an opening perspective is really, really fun and good. From a closing perspective, it's the kind that I like, where you don't have to try hard to close it, but you definitely don't get the kind of fall shut guillotine action that some people are really chasing for. Let's talk about the clip. So the clip on these, all three of these use this interesting design we'll talk about when we look inside, where they have a separate piece here and they use these kind of standoffs. The only other knife that I've really noticed them doing this is on the Richard Rogers OEM Slim. I don't know if he does it on the custom Slim utilities too, but on the OEM Slim it uses these standoffs. I think the original Slims didn't have a pocket clip at all. Actually, no, I think I've looked this up. I think the original Slims didn't have it at all. And the second version of the Slim Utilities had this same kind of thing, and then the OEM version does too. It's a kind of a neat effect. It does mean that you get really good clearance back here. And it also means that there is absolutely nothing in the way, similar to the way like a milled tie clip would be, in the sense that the thing attaching it is all behind where your pocket would go, so there's no protruding screws. But that does mean that these don't carry particularly deep, because you're not going to be able to go past that. This is about where that one hits, and it's okay. This one is basically the exact same thing. This one's a little bit better, basically because they're shoving the clip into the far corner. And so you get about that sticking out of your pocket. And because of the way that this is canted forward, the entire thing wants to kind of hang in your pocket slightly off to the side. And because this is off like that, and because this is curving like that, it's really not much. It's not bad. I personally love deep carry clips above all else, but this is not bad. And what's nice is that you don't really feel these in hand. They work pretty darn well in that regard. They also all have really good spring tension. These clips like work pretty darn effectively, and I find it pretty easy to get them in and out, but they do all do one thing that I really dislike. This one is using an actual ceramic ball, but there are versions of this that have this as a milled part of the tie, like you'll see over here. And the Whippersnapper, I think, all have this milled ball on the bottom. And I don't like it, because what's going on is that by kind of definition, this ball is contacting at just one spot. There's one singular part where the entirety of this lock bar pressure is pressing against your pocket. And so when you're pulling this in and out, rather than that force being distributed, and they're pretty firm, that it's all just on that one single spot that's going to get dragged out of your pocket. And so especially if you keep your knife in the same general spot in your pocket every single time, you will wear through your pockets a lot faster with these types. Especially this one. So this is tie, and tie is roughly 40-ish HRC. This is one of those silicon nitride style of ceramic ball bearings. Those are like roughly 80 to 85 HRC. So this is a super hard little ball that's going to be dragging a single point of contact across your pocket in and out every single time. So it will wear out your pocket faster, but in terms of functionality, they go in and out super easy. I think they work really well, but yeah, I don't know. I do think what they do nice, though, is they fit the general feel of the knife. They're stylized in a way that I think matches the overall stylization of these. Okay, let's take a look inside. And for the most part, what's happening inside here is the same across both the Whippersnapper and the Busker, with one really notable exception. The Busker, like most knives, has a single stop pin, while the Whippersnapper has two. And we'll talk in a moment about how they're using those two, but we'll also talk about why I don't think they actually need to, and why I'm surprised that it's still there. To start, these screws in the back go into these barrel spacers, and this backspacer slides down on top of them. It has these milled like rings around the outside, and that's what allows them to achieve that really cool floating backspacer look where you can see through it. I think that's a really neat effect. The clip is done in an odd way, where instead of a single piece, it's made with these barrel spacer standoffs that give it the rise. That one benefit of that is it allows them to anodize those a different color than the clip itself, which just gives them even more room for artistic expression. But it also means they can do other things more easily, like check this out. There are these little slopes on the side of this that correspond to sloped parts here in these countersunk holes. You can see that those look different than the counter bored holes that are straight up and down that you see for the screws. What that means is that these little sloped bit here will perfectly center it in that spot, and it won't be able to slide side to side. That's really cool, because on a lot of clips, whether it's done with this kind of, barrel spacer standoff thing or not, they'll have a flat bottom to it, which means that if the screw gets loose at all, the clip itself can kind of shift laterally side to side, and that's not possible here. One of the ways you can see that is that there's exactly one spot and only one spot where this clip has ever made contact. Now, I did talk about that when I talked about the clip, I think, where because this is a rounded dome, there is just one single point of contact that is taking the entire force of this spring. And I don't love that, because it does the exact same thing to this scale that it does to your pants. All of the force of this is going to be dragging on a single spot on your pants, and it definitely will wear it faster. Now you'll see that there are these little countersunk parts here, counterboard parts here, for the steel Raceway washers. Now it's cool that they have steel Raceway washers, because you can see that you can wear track into those rather than wearing it into the tie itself. But it's also kind of surprising to see that they did that, in part because they're not doing ceramic bearings, and that's usually where you'll see people bother. It does still matter even with steel, because steel is harder than tie, but on ceramic bearings it would especially matter. So it's nice that they did that, so that if you do swap these out for something like skiffs, you're kind of preset up there. But it's actually kind of surprising that they don't have ceramic bearings in these, in part because of the price, but also because they have a ceramic detent ball, and that's, it's odd that you would do one and not the other. Now, this is a particularly wide detent ball. It's very, very large compared to the average one. And as a result, that's part of how they're getting the really smooth action they're getting. Because when you have a very large detent ball, the surface that is running along the top is just comparably flatter than if it was a really small one. And so it gives you kind of the same effect of like a shaved off, flattened detent ball. Now that runs in this Detent track right here. And I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this on my camera, but this isn't just like cut in. This is actually polished. It's actually shiny. And that's how you're getting that incredibly glassy smooth finish, is that this track is polished and this is wider and flatter. The other thing I want to call your attention to is this the detent ramp itself, because I talked about this being a perfect implementation. I said that one of the ways that you can do that is by making this sufficiently long, but that's actually not what's going on here. What they're doing here is using something that's relatively short, but they're making it have that smooth transition off by making it not a sharp angle. Most detent ramps are just a flat ramp, and this is instead curved like that, giving you that really smooth transition. If I zoom in, let's see if we can see that. Yeah, so can you see how that's actually curved at the top? It's not just flat. And so that's a really cool way of giving you that really smooth transition without having to make this incredibly long the entire way. So the thing that I really want to show you is how these stop pins work, but to do that, I'll have to slightly assemble this knife. So let's first talk about this pivot here. So they're doing this, they're making this a captive pivot the exact same way that Civivi and Wii does, by making a notch right here in the outside of the pivot. Do you see that right there? Now that's going to correspond to a little indentation notch thing right there. Yeah, it's kind of hard to make out. That's going to sit there and prevent that from spinning. Now, that kind is a little bit tricky to assemble simply because you have to be able to tell that it's fully engaged. And as right now, you can see that there's a lip. And so you kind of spin this until it sits just a little bit tighter in. There, now you can see it's fully in. So let's real quick assemble this so I can show you how this works. Okay, so now you can see that in the fully open position, this would be when the lock bar is engaged, that we're contacting with this stop pin, the one closer. And in order to have hit the second stop pin, we would need the flipper tab to be much larger. And so part of the reason why we have the flipper tab, the stop pin where we have it, is so that this flipper tab doesn't have to be incredibly long and we're able to reach something that's further out. And you can see that when we close the other direction, we're actually engaging now with the second stop pin. Man, is it tight to see. So let's zoom in. Yeah, they're incredibly close, but you can see that this one is actually not touching and that one is. However, I don't think they actually need it. By having the second stop in here, they're engaging a little bit earlier, but focus for a moment on how close this blade gets to the backspacer. Now I'm going to take this stop pin out, and we're going to pretend there was just the one, and it will close slightly more. But look, it's still really quite far away, like far enough that I think it'd be perfectly fine. And so it really seems surprising to me that they would bother having this second stop pin. Why not just have this one? In fact, if anything, if they're worried about this being a little bit too close, but I don't think that's too close, then why couldn't they just make the backspacer itself slightly shorter this direction? You know, like shave a 0.5 millimeter off or something like that? It seems quite weird that they would do this. It seems weird to me from the get-go, and so it seems even weirder to me that they left it on. You can see that even when they were redesigning this knife to be a Bolsterlock, they still do that exact same 2 stop pin design. One for the open, and one for the closed. Now on the Busker, by comparison, we have just the 1 stop pin. And you can see that we're contacting it from a different direction. On this one, we're coming at it from like a downward direction because this sticks out past it and it's sitting further back that direction. On the Busker, because the flipper tab is shorter, it's able to hit right here at the back instead. And so you can see that it's not coming down on it. I mean, it kind of is, but the force is mostly this direction and a little bit down instead of that direction and quite down. On the other side, you can see we're contacting right there. And the reason why they're able to get away with that and have this reasonably high up still is because the entire knife is a little bit thicker here in the blade and thinner here in the handle by ratio. So this part here is thicker compared to this, which allows them to have this stop pin higher up because this blade's going to come pretty close to that when it closes. By comparison, these stop pins on the Whippersnapper end up hitting right where this choil is, and that choil comes up pretty far. And so as a result, this is thinner and so they have to have the stop pin further down to be able to compensate. And that's part of the reason, again, why they have this as a lip shape to be able to hit down on that direction. Now, again, I think they could have accomplished this by just having a single stop pin. I think even this stop pin, as is, would work sufficiently, but if they were worried about it, they could have moved this ever so slightly in either direction, and I think it would have been perfectly fine. So it seems like a really pretty strange choice to me. Anyway, this is everything I wanted to cover inside, so let's pop back out to the outside. So the last thing I want to talk about is my general feeling of this knife, and a lot of that is going to come down to the customizability and the finishing. These knives are really good in a lot of ways. Like, they're really functional in a lot of ways. They're good knives. I wish they were slicier, but they're so good at this kind of utility cut work that I do most often that I find them to be tremendously useful knives, and I really, really enjoy using them. But the thing that really wows me about them is just how much you can make it your own and how good a job they do of that kind of customization finishing work. There are so many things you can get done to these, and they are so cool looking. I tend to personally be more of a like straight, clean, full tie, plain Jane kind of fancier person. I tend to be a little bit more fancy and a little bit more, kind of a restrained form of fancy. Some people, a lot of people actually, consider this swirly Damascus everything to be fancy. They call that full dress from a lot of custom knife makers. To me, those look a little bit too busy to be fancy by my definition. To me, fancy knives tend to be really kind of refined, clean, and minimal. And so the crazy stuff you can do on these aren't really my style most of the time, but you can get something like this. And this is really my style. Maybe not the bronze, I'm not super bronze, but like this kind of finish, this combination of finishes they do that they call their text wash is something that you can only get through them. They invented it, and it feels so good. It has such good traction. It hides wear so well. So even with someone like me, who either wants like a really clean, fancy dress knife, or who wants like a really practical hide-all-wear stone-washed utility knife, they have so many options for making something that is tailored exactly to you. And I love that. I love that. These people wow me. Everything about the fit and finish on these knives is next level, like truly, truly next level. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where like, are these my favorite knives? No. Do I carry them all the time? No. But are they spectacular knives? Yeah, absolutely. Do I recommend them? Absolutely. Are they some of the best smaller knives on the market, especially if you're going to be using utility cuts? Absolutely. If you're in the market for one of these at all, they're kind of expensive, but there's so many of them and they're so kind of odd that if you're willing to get something that's not truly customized to you, you can actually get a pretty darn good deal on these on the secondary market. So definitely look at what's out there. Definitely look at their website and see what options they have that speak to you. And honestly, if you can, pick one of these up. They're really freaking cool. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time.